Okay, hello activators. Good morning for UK friends. It's still not lunchtime. Happy lunchtime for the other ones. I hope that everybody's doing great. Before we start, we will take a few seconds and the classic checks because we are fully live, as you know. So, do you see us? Do you see my screen? Do you hear us? If somebody can type that in the chat or use the little emojis to have some thumbs ups and thumbs downs, that would be very cool of you. And of course, hello B, hello Mr. Benoit. Happy to have you both with me. Okay, I see the chat is getting into motion. Hello Robin. Dankjewel meneer Koen. Okay, we have some people over here. Hello, Catherine, Sasha, Janine. Okay, you know what? Because we are with more people, and I like always to take a few minutes in the beginning in the chat. If you can maybe type where you're from, which country, and maybe your function, just so that people can start exchanging, and then we can try maybe to bring more personalization into this first product release. So for my end, I'm working from home, having a flu. Don't worry, it's not a COVID story over here. Working from home and based in Belgium, just next to the airport, so that you know everything about me. And our headquarter is basically very close to you, Benoit, if I'm not wrong. And Benoit did freeze, so that means that he is crushing. So Benoit is in Louvain-la-Neuve. He lives, his place is like... oh, okay, he's there.
I thought he was speaking about another Benoit.
No, I'm talking with you, Benoit. I was wondering where you're from, and I said you live very close to our headquarters.
I'm nearly in. I live in the office.
Okay, cool. You live in the office. That's even better. And I guess that Friesland is in the Netherlands. RNLE, good question.
It's UK.
It's in the UK. Okay, so we have some UK people over here. Sukmut, it's .be is definitely Belgium.
And people from Hood, Mechelen City represented.
Yeah, that's because you're based in there. You're based in there. Cool. Cool. Okay, you know what? 12:02. See the chat getting in motion. Abel and Cole, great to have you here, Catherine. And that's UK then. CRM manager, those are the people I love to talk about it because they leverage a lot of the feature of our tool. They like to challenge us. And if I'm not wrong, Catherine, your customer success manager is Nicole. Okay, cool. So you know what? Because I know that it will be lunchtime very soon for the people that are on the same time zone that we are. I know that the UK people within an hour. So you know what? Let's maybe start the presentation. So it's not a presentation, it's a conversation. That's what you need to keep in mind. Our product releases is something very important for all of us at Actito, going from the technical team to the customer success, even to Benoit. And I will present Benoit in a couple of minutes for those that don't know him, which would be pretty strange. But so at Actito, we want to deliver 4 product releases every year. You will ask me why 4. That's the agility, that's a way of bringing the motion and the dynamics. Why? Because you influence the roadmap. I'm not saying that you define it, but you influence it. The feedback, the questions, and everything that we will have during those 30, 45 minutes over here is really useful for us to adapt a roadmap so that we can really help you win the activation, because you know that the activation is really important for us at Actito. So you need to influence us. By the way, a big shout out to all the people that did some G2 reviews. We got new batches. We will be communicated about that. But it is also where we pull out the information to know what is maybe not optimal for you. We also have a look at those reviews and integrate that in our future roadmap. So really keep in mind, this is the commute moment between the product and our user, so you. We had an amazing session at the end of the year with a lot of people, and it was an AMA session. So AMA stands for Ask Me Anything, and it was really cool because we could pull people on the stage. So if you want to be on the stage, just tell us. We love to have that conversation. We had the Dutch session 2 hours ago, and we were very happy to have Philippe that was really interacting with us and asking directly questions to Benoit. That's again the idea behind those presentations or those conversations, like I said, is to exchange change, and make sure that you have a look at our previous releases, which Brian is responsible for, which make a very smooth transition because most of the people know me. I'm John, the guy in the marketing and partnership department, part of the dinosaur of the company, but yeah, just working in the marketing. But the most important persons over here are Brian, which is the product marketer. All that communication, that conversation, everything you see is done by him. So make sure to put him in the spotlight, maybe a little bit under pressure as well, because he will be demonstrating a lot of things. And at the other hand, I'm very pleased to have Benoit. Benoit is one of the founder of the company. He will give you a bit more background about himself, but it's really cool to have your CEO or co-CEO, because we got two, to have your co-CEO presenting not one, not two, but 3 product releases. That shows you how deeply involved everybody at Actito is about delivering the best activation platform for you, or dear customers. So the floors will be yours now, Benoit.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Like John said, I'm one of the co-founders and co-CEO of Actito. And before I founded Actito, I was in fact I'm a lawyer, and I worked as a researcher in consumer protection and privacy protection. This is why clearly I have a strong interest in these matters, and I will try to share with you the enthusiasm I have towards privacy protection. So after having worked as a researcher, I've created Actito about 20 years ago. And we have, from the inception of Actito, always tried to implement the logic of privacy by design. This is clearly to show that the protection of users and consumer data has always been our priority. And this is why we have, at all stages of development and the provision of the service, put in place mechanisms to ensure that data is protected. And they are based on the principles that are included in the GDPR and in the legislations that are close to the GDPR. For instance, in Canada, you have a protection of data that's very similar to the GDPR. In Switzerland, also, even in Japan, you have lots of regulations that are similar to the GDPR, and Actito, as it is compliant with the GDPR, is of course compliant with these regulations. The principles in these regulations are always the same, and there are mainly 6 that I will just highlight and put in context with what Actito does. First, loyalty and transparency. This is the main principle of GDPR. We only collect data in compliance with the principles of having a consent. We have a consent for everything we do in Actito. And we have features that ensure that this content is documented everywhere, that there is a way to know what the consumer wants, and there are ways for the consumer to explain what he wants to do with the data he gives us. Second principle, purpose limitation. We collect data only, we and you as a client, you only collect data for specific and documented purposes. We will show that later. We have features ensuring that. The data minimization principle, it's very important to only keep the data that's useful for activation. We are not a big data company. We don't want to keep the largest database of data about consumers. We only keep what's useful for activation. Accuracy, a principle that the principle is that we should only keep the data that's accurate about our consumers, about our users, and we have tools, again, to ensure that the data collected is correct at any time, and that we don't keep data that contains errors, for instance, double entries, and so on. Retention time. In the GDPR, there is a principle that data should only be kept for the duration of what you want to do with it. Afterwards, it has to be erased from the system. And Actito, as it embedded in its system, there are ways to ensure that after a period of time, let's say 24 months, 36 months, it will depend. The data is automatically purged in order to ensure that there is no data that's kept rotting in some place in Actito. And the last principle is the principle of integrity and confidentiality. This has to do with security. And we have security policies in place that ensure that the data is secure on our servers in our data centers, that when our people use this data to perform a task, it's done in conformity with the GDPR. And thus it's a combination of technical and human resources. And as to human resources, we train our employees on a daily basis to ensure that they will keep your data secure. And this is really the main point of the security aspects of Actito. We'll go a bit deeper into the details, technical details of this security aspects later on. But what I would like now to focus on is the fact that among the security measures we take and the policies we have, the most important policy is that the data we collect and we will use are located here in Europe for European consumers. We have some clients in Canada and North America. They are kept on a data center in Quebec, but all the data pertaining to customers in Europe are located in Brussels and in Paris, and we will see that later. But this gives me an occasion just to give you a view, a panorama of what happened in consumer protection since 1995. And 1995 is an important date in consumer protection and privacy protection because it's the date of the first data protection directive. So it's already an old regulation that has been applied to data treatments and data collection since the beginning in Europe. So 1995 marks the beginning of this data protection. And it's a directive, so it's an instrument that has to be transformed in local law. That means that every country in Europe had a different view on data protection. There were basic principles, but the problem was that the implementation of this regulation in different countries was a bit different. But the main aspect, one of the main aspects of the privacy directive was that the data of the consumers had to be treated in accordance with the directive. And that means that if you wanted to send your data to a country that didn't have the same level of protection, this was forbidden, you couldn't do it. So the Commission came with a principle, a treaty, in fact, in 2000, and created what was called at this moment the safe harbor. The idea was that companies in the US, for instance, where there was no legislation that had the same level of protection than in Europe, companies in this country could self-certify themselves and declare that they were compliant with the safe harbor. Let me say it was a joke. You had lots and lots of companies in the US self-certifying as safe harbor companies, but they weren't compliant at all. And that was a huge problem. This led to a very interesting story in privacy protection, and this is the story of Max Schrems. Max Schrems is an activist located, his country of origin is Austria, and he came to the conclusion that Facebook, namely, was violating the European regulation because it kept sending data to the US. And after a very long procedure, he could prove that indeed sending data to the US, despite the fact that there was a safe harbor, was not in conformity with the directive. And he obtained that the regulation, the treaty, the safe harbor treaty was invalidated. And Again, big problem. The day the Safe Harbor Regulation Treaty, was invalidated, the transfers to US were forbidden, and this was, of course, a very big problem for lots of companies. But you know that the European Commission is very efficient in trying to find loopholes in the European law, and so they created a new treaty called the Privacy Shield in 2016. That was, in fact, a mere copy of the first one. So no big difference, but it was a new one. And so people restarted to transfer data to the US. But luckily or unluckily for the tenants of the Privacy Shield, the Max Schrems, who was still very active at this moment, he went back to the court and he obtained that the Privacy Shield as such was also declared invalid. In the meantime, the GDPR was published, and the GDPR basically said exactly the same thing as the former directive, saying that you couldn't transfer data to the US. And now we are in this situation for the moment where, if you look at the decision, except in very specific case, the situation is that you cannot send data to the US without infringing the GDPR. That is seen by lots of companies as a big problem. In fact, I must, let's be a bit more precise, because the decision, the Schrems 2 decision, is already 2 years old, but people have had a very, have had lots of difficulty to understand and to process what it meant for them. So you have had lots of conferences, workshops, and so on, with lawyers paid by Google and Facebook, trying to convince you that you could still send data to the US. But no, let's be absolutely clear. For the moment, there is absolutely no way to ensure that transferring data to the US is conform to the legislation. And very recently, if you look at the decision by local courts in Belgium, namely, but also in Austria, all these decisions come to the conclusion that no, sending data to the US is not allowed. And more precisely, they focused on specific piece of software like Google Analytics, where they came to the conclusion that Google Analytics, that serves maybe 50% of the websites in the world, sends data to the servers of Google in the US, and as such are not conform to the GDPR. But that's a huge problem, because this doesn't apply only to Google Analytics. This applies to every SaaS provider in the world. That means that if you send data to one of your providers offering you CDP services or email marketing services or you name what, it's for the moment an infraction to the GDPR and to the equivalent regulation, like the equivalent of GDPR in the UK, for instance.
I think it's important what you said, Benoit, because, sorry, I'm jumping in as usual. I like to interrupt people, you know me. But I know there are UK people over here, and as they are not part of Europe anymore, maybe how do they need to understand GDPR? So far, I understand they have something.
They're still part of Europe. They are not part of the European Union. That's different.
Okay, but I think it's important. Do GDPR apply to our UK friends as well in the same constraints, or I love to say it's an opportunity more than a constraint? GDPR, is it the same for them, or are there some adaptation today?
The situation now is a bit tricky, because as there is no replacement for GDPR, the UK has still a legislation that is inspired by GDPR. This is not GDPR anymore, because it doesn't apply to UK people for the moment. But the legislation is really, it has been created on the basis of GDPR. That means that all the principles that existed for GDPR still exist in the UK, but they are different interpretation, and in the coming years there will certainly be differences. But keep in mind this: one of the most important partners of the UK at what regards data protection, for data transfers, is still Europe. So they will have to maintain the same kind of regulation, and maintaining the same kind of regulation will, of course, as a consequence, that data transfers that will pass through the UK will have to comply with the principle that you cannot send data at the end to the US. Voilà. That's the point.
Just looking at Andy and all the people in the chat, does that all make sense out of the UK? Is it the way you are approaching data privacy as well? You try to stick to the European rules, and because you think it's a good thing, maybe just sharing some ideas around that if you want, or we can of course continue as well. But I love to have a bit the feeling of the local people and also the people running it. I like to say that GDPR, when it landed, and you hear the passion of Benoit around the data privacy. And so I remember GDPR, it was like the big wolf was arriving, but I saw a lot of brands taking advantage of that to re-put the customer in the center. And like I was saying in the Dutch session earlier today, my mom, which is 60 plus, is now much more aware about what the big American players are doing with her data. And now you see that the consumer is aware today. And so us as we definitely as vendor, and you as marketeers, you need to integrate that. So I was wondering how do everybody sees that? Could be great to have some maybe sentences in the chat. But otherwise, I'll let you continue, Benoit. Sorry.
Well, so the idea will just at the end of these two slides, the idea is that for the moment, maybe it will change because you have discussions that are continuing between the US and Europe. For the moment, it's very dangerous to keep using SaaS solutions that are located in the US, even if these are SaaS solutions hosting their data in Europe, because the Patriot Act allows the American government to look for data even if they are located in Europe. So that's a very big and important aspect you have to keep in mind. You can take the risk, of course, but fines are now applied. It took a while, but now you have, namely in France, you have lots of players that have been admonished by the CNIL, Commission Nationale Informatique et Liberté, specifically on the Google Analytics affair, and they have received an ultimatum of 1 month just to cease and desist using Google Analytics. And this will happen also for other SaaS platforms. It's just a matter of time, with the risk of being fined up to 3 or 4% of the turnover of the company. So better not take the risk and look for a European player having its data in Europe. This is the case with Actito, and this is what we will explain in the coming minutes. We will explain how we keep the data on one side, and then all the features, the privacy enhancing features that we have put in Actito to help you ensure that you compliant with GDPR. Thank you, and have a nice day.
And drop questions so that I can be annoying with my boss. Drop questions so I can be annoying with my boss, because he needs to answer them live, and you see that he cannot trick it. Thank you very much, Benoit. I think it was very interesting, so that you could position what we do and how we think about data at Actito. Having that timeline give also a big vision about the fact it's not new, but it's accelerating. I think that is what people need to keep in mind. I think I love when I'm working very long time now for Benoit. And I'm always what you are ready to take, but there is risk and risk. I will say, don't take risk with data would be my advice to you if you want to still have some decent business in the coming months and years. So nice transition to me, and I will keep it very short. And if you want me to go deeper in some elements, just drop it in the chat. I don't see it for the moment, so Brian, just make the shout out if I need to stop. But I would like to give you some perspective at what's behind the curtains, behind the scene at Actito, and where we host, how we host, and those kind of elements. I like to share this quick visual because I think it really helped me, and I hope you as well, to understand what are we talking about when we talk about customer activation platforms. And basically, if you take this vision from the left, is just to show to all our clients, partners, prospects, stop telling me you don't have data. You have much more data than what you believe, because you have probably a CRM, an email tool, a loyalty program, a web shop, and all those kind of things. So your problem is not that you don't have data. Your problem is that you cannot connect the data and give sense to your data. And basically, that's why we love to talk about activation at Actito. It's not just about merging the data, it's about giving life to your data and activate those, because we always saying by activating data, you activate customer, and by activating customer, you activate brands. And that's the center of what you see. That center is really the core piece of Actito. This is where all the people that knows Actito experiment what is activation. And that is really, keep that in mind. We are an activation platform. Try to avoid to jump in all the buzz today from data lakes, CDPs, DMPs, and everything. At the end, focus on your customer. That's also what Benoit was saying. Being really aware about your customer and making sure that you collect in a decent way, but that you do something with your data is what we want you to take with you out of this session today. So because it's also about size and size of infrastructure, I'm talking, of course, over here, and showing that you're powerful, you need to keep in mind that Actito today hosts more than 500 million data on a server. And like I was explaining to my mom still a few years ago, the cloud is not the cloud, the real cloud. There is always a physical somewhere where that data need to be hosted. And so we host that data, but which is more important for you to keep in mind, we activate 500,000 data consumers basically every single day, and probably more than once a day, because we have more than 800 brands. So Brian can be in multiple databases from multiple of our clients, and we will activate that. And we need to make sure you brands can activate it, but that that data is also safely stored, secure, protected, and everything you can imagine around it. And like Benoit said, since the inception of the company, privacy by design is really hard-coded in our DNA. And so everything we are building and that I will be sharing with you today has those concepts. Keep those concepts always very deeply engaged. So first thing you should keep in mind, ask yourself, where is your data hosted? And during the other session, we were talking about tools like Dropbox. You know, when you do the setup of the license, you drop me a Dropbox links. Strangely, Dropbox has server in Boston, in Atlanta, in San Francisco, some pieces in Ireland. So you see that your data flows is already in a way broken because that data was shipped there. So because of what Benoit said, they could access it. So ask sometimes yourself, where is that data hosted? Where is it stored? Because we can tell you at Actito, it can be stored only in 2 locations, or in Brussels or in Paris. So really center of Europe. So the far away, enough distance between them, and I will come back to that as well. But keep in mind, nothing in the US, in another country than a European country. We have built strong protocols of exchanging data because you need to have that power, you know, being able to scale very fast, because we got a new customer, I don't know, with 10 million records. So we have encrypted protocols so that we can increase the power of our platform when requested, but also keep in mind that having our own encryption make us much more safe, because people don't know us as well as what they know an Amazon, for example, or an Azure, and those kind of things. We are also on a path to becoming fully certified ISO 27001, but today I can already tell you that we are compliant. And just because the proof of the pudding is in the eating, if customers like Deutsche Bank trust us about the way we host secure data, I can tell you that ISO 27001 is just easy for us, because today we are trained by guys like Benoit or by our DPO. We have a lot of trainings, but also updates and processes that we need to work on. If you send me an email with an Excel sheet and data, I will refuse your email. I will delete it directly. I will give you a call and tell you that you need to deliver that in another way. And the entire organization is trained around that. And those are reflexes. I can tell you a few months ago, we received, and it can sounds totally crazy, we receive a database on a USB stick by mail, physical mail. Can you imagine if that USB stick arrived at a wrong destination, what could happen around it? And so we are trained with that, and we took the good methods, warning and processes to make sure that we do well with that, like preventing Benoit or DPO and everything. At the other end, it's important to have at least 2 data centers, because let's imagine something goes wrong, electricity falls down in Belgium for I don't know which reason. The fact that we have strong backups between our systems make us always up and running. And as I told, scalability was very important. I can tell you that those backups are encrypted, but also those sequences between the machine or whether it's up running. Basically, if everything was crashing, I think we would lose maybe a couple of hours of interaction. And when I talk about interaction, could be like maybe 2 or 3 hours of opening of emails. That's the maximum that we will encounter today because of that scalability and those processes we have put together. So I think keep that also in mind. Very important when you look at not only where your data is hosted, but also if something is happening, a data center is crashing or whatever, what are the processes behind it? And that is, of course, explained in our contracts and everything. I couldn't go deeper if you want. And I will take the question in a few seconds. I just have 2 slides, and then I jump to the questions, promise. Sorry. Security by design is like really part of the culture of Actito from one hand, but also from our DNA and from everything we do. When we're building new features, we always have that principle of data privacy in mind. So when we will be building things, we will always think, okay, what are the impact? What are the risks? How can we prevent the maximum of happening? I will say failure 0 is probably impossible, but we try to always look at that. And again, that goes through security protocols, but also a lot of updates. I cannot tell you how many times we go to production a year, but it's crazy. Already releasing like we do is crazy, but I can tell you each time there is a problem, we have a fix, we go directly live. I know there were some hustle with some servers. We were even not impacted by that because we have our own systems again and our own people that understand and build that security level for you so that you don't need to care about it. Again, that is not to afraid the market, but be sure that we do everything we can to make your data as safe as possible. And there is a technical part to that, but there is also a human part of that. So we have, for example, if there is a breach, a full process behind that as well. If there is a crash, full process again. And since now the news and everybody knows about Ukraine for the moment, we also increase our own things to prevent. I think there is a lot about security, which is about preventing problems. And again, this is where we work hard on it. Sorry. And again, and we don't say it enough, but part of Actito is our technology, and we have a great technology, but we also have outstanding people. And I think the biggest risk today, it's probably not at the technical part, but rather at the human part. Really sorry for the coughing. I'm still a bit ill. So we have our own processes. We have our own DPO. We have strict policies just to ensure, that everything is working fine. B, can you take it back?
Yeah, sure. You take a breath. So yeah, like John said, the 50% tech, the 50% people. Typically, the people part is where you typically have the liability. I had a chat with our CTO, Ben, who is responsible of the whole infrastructure we have hardware-wise. And it's nearly impossible to get through, as John said, with the penetration tests. The main thing is training people to handle that data properly. Like you've heard about the USB sticks and so on, we get regular trainings, for example, internally to show us how we should handle these data. If we have a customer sending data through email or something, we have to delete it immediately. So I'll show you in a minute what it will look like or how you should tackle the transfer of personal data. But it is an aspect, and I think for you, your company as well, this is something that you can work on as well to make sure that your data stays safe. Again, data breaches and so on, it might happen. It's good to have a process behind that. Typically, since GDPR, people are obligated to have a DPO, so most of that should have been taken care of already. But on our side as well, it's being taken care of. And to give you an idea, so we have our own DPO as well, who is Charlotte. If we get requests, for example, from your customers asking us to delete their data from the databases, we notify you as well. So there's a lot being put into place to make sure that we can, on the human aspect of things, also make sure that you have a maximum protection for your data and privacy. Okay. So if that's okay for you, John, I can jump to the features.
Be my guest, and really sorry, I really want to be there. Maybe I had to hand it over directly to Brian. Not that I don't like the topic, but still get some flu over here. No, you did
No
it
problem.
perfect. I think
Okay.
show them the candy, mate. I think that is what we want here. Show us the
Yeah.
candy.
Okay. And you take care, right?
I'm still alive.
Okay.
I'm still alive. Don't worry.
Okay, so let me just share my screen with you people. In the meantime, are there any questions on the hardware aspect, the software aspect, so our infrastructure? I had to rectify indeed something like Igor pointed out. The data centers are still owned by Actito. It's maybe a bad choice of words from my side. But yeah, the centers are owned, and if we see that there are needs from foreign customers for Switzerland, for example, or countries that have their specific legislation on that part as well, probably open up data centers in there as well. So, but again, it's good to know that since we manage everything from A to Z, we're much more agile to jump on those new legislations and changes in data privacy legislation, because we know perfectly what's in there.
The thing is, just so to emphasize what you say, of course, we don't own data center, but everything within the data center is ours. So we buy the server, we send our own people to set them up, to put all the technical aspect out of that is done by us, of course. And it costs a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, but I think that shows already the dedication to security as well, because that's what you said. It's the fact is that a lot of people outsource the whole server and hardware part, whereas you give there's a lot of risks that come with that by outsourcing that to other companies, such as not perfectly knowing where your servers are located. So it's a dedication, but it pays off as well. So. Okay, so I see that we're quite moving on time. So as promised, we're going to cover the features that you can use in Actito to make sure that you stay compliant, that you can confidently say to your customers, we do respect your privacy, we know what we do with your data. So, and the first part of that is something that we all know pretty well by now, I guess, is the Data Mart Studio. Because data is something very abstract, and I think for a lot of people, we're talking about cloud and servers and stuff that you don't see. And one of the first things that we wanted to do was make sure that you have a view on what kind of data you have on your customers, so that you can really start getting into that reflection as well of which data do we actually need? Why do we use that data? And that's when you get more and more into the lines and the spirit of GDPR as well. So the Data Mart Studio gives you a full overview of all the attributes that you have. So as you can see in our central profile table, we have things like a first name, gender, last purchase date, and so on. Keep in mind, and it's something you might have noticed with every attribute that you create, every opt-in that you create, you always have the possibility to add a description to those as well, which can be mighty handy if you have some data where it might be a bit iffy whether or not you're using that. So all the data that we have, for example, are the subscriptions, of course. Technical data is being kept as well. You have full transparency on that as well. You can find that on the below in the table. And then same goes for the purple tables. You can perfectly see what kind of data is being kept in there. You can add a description to those tables. And if you want to take it a step further, this is a feature that we implemented when the GDPR came into place, is the GDPR registry. So for any data privacy matter, be it for GDPR or if you're in another country outside Europe, this is very handy to have filled in by your DPO, for example. This is a complete document that you can fill in with information such as which department is taking care of this information, who is the DPO, who do we contact if there's a breach, what is the purpose of this data. So have a look at that. We can definitely assist you on filling that in. But this is something, again, for you as a marketeer, this is legal stuff, but it can be done for you so that in case you have an audit, you have the necessary information available. So that can be done for your central profile table. It can be done for every purple table. It's good to know for you that you have that available. Now, GDPR-wise, it's your individual customers' data privacy. Your individual customers have their rights to exert in terms of the right to be forgotten, the right to have a copy of all their data that you have available on them, and so on. So just to give you a bit of an idea, I'm going to show you a profile here in our database. Little notice, this is all dummy data. So I'm not showing any real people's data. That would be kind of contradictory if we're talking about data privacy, right? So I'm just going to show you one of our dummy profiles, Franklin Benson. And that's the big advantage, again, in Actito, as John said, to activate your data. We want to make sure that you know your customers and you have so that full 360-degree view on your customers. All the data that you have on a person, you can consult it here, for example. So here's the technical data that we mentioned and so on, purchase history, all those kind of data points that we mentioned. This is where you can find it. Also something to note is a very important part of GDPR is marketing consent and opt-in management. So Actito has an opt-in management module, let's say. People that used to work with MailChimp, for example, or another email service tool might have noticed that you have to work with lists, duplicate data, where it gets tricky to know what kind of data you have in one list and what in the other. So this is what you can avoid by using Actito. Again, you have the central database, opt-ins are plugged into that one central profile, so you have a good view on what people are subscribed to. You get a nice detail as well on what they are subscribed. And if you want to have more information on that as well, I strongly invite you to click on this interactions tab. And this is where you'll find every interaction that you've had with your customer up until 3 years ago. As Benoit said, we keep track of that data for 3 years maximum, because after that, we're obligated to delete that. And here you can find already more information about subscriptions. For example, you have this little eye icon that shows you more details on what you've had, what you have in terms of information on the opt-in. So imagine that Franklin Benson calls us and he says, look, I'm receiving information, emails to which I haven't subscribed. Then we have the full details here to show him, look, you did subscribe using this device, this browser on that date. And if he wants to revoke that, we can still do that in the platform as well. Now, something new that we developed, because it's still a product release, right? One of the new features that we've implemented is the tracking opt-in. You have the classical marketing opt-in where people can say yes or no, I want to receive marketing communications, or I don't. Something new and fairly unique in the market is this opt-in consent, which means that people can decline on being tracked on their emails, SMS interactions, and website visits. For you as a marketer, that gives you, again, the opportunity to open up a conversation with your customers. You can say, look, if you're not fond of being tracked or us keeping your data, you can still subscribe to certain of our newsletters and we won't track you. So that opens up, again, that discussion with your customers about privacy and giving them the freedom to choose what they want to be being kept track of. And I think it opens up for a lot of interesting customer relations in the long term.
Maybe Brian, because I like what you're saying there. So basically, people can tell, I don't want to be tracked. What is the impact then on personalization when you do something like that? Because if I don't want to be tracked, how can I get the best offer? And I like your angle of opening that conversation. I think that is basically, I'm giving the answer to my question.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's a bit up to us to translate what are we doing with your data, what are we using it for, and if people find it worth the advantage, then they'll share that information with you. And you see that brands are moving more and more towards that. I think people are getting fed up with the stalker way of how Google, for example, collects your data and just shows you ads from stuff that you mentioned once in a week, maybe. I think people are fed up with that. It gives a stalker vibe, and I think the relation that you should have with your customers should be more of a dialogue and sharing rather than stalking and just throwing everything you know about them at them.
Think at your welcome program, guys. Just sharing, eh? Think at your welcome programs.
Yeah, because this is just the first layer, I'd say. And after that, we're talking deliverability, we're talking content, we're talking personalization. This is the very foundation. But afterwards, you get a lot of other interesting topics that you can cover, on which we can definitely do a session if some people are interested. I'd say drop it in the chat. But this is foundation, I'd say. Okay, I see we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, basically the question is, does them confirming their consent bypass Apple Mail privacy?
No, it doesn't. The fact is that is something that happens on the customer side. So it's Apple that opens up those clicks and that generates those clicks and openings. So that's something that will not be impacted by whether they are opted in or not.
I will maybe, just to make sure that we answer right the question, and feel free to open it. So what we have done, and I would be more than happy to go deeper in that, Handy, if you want. So our product team took another angle on what most of the vendors are doing today. We will only consider an opening by email if you click within the email. Long story short, because Apple is generating all those openings, we just take when there is a click that we attribute an opening. And we are looking at those analytics since now nearly 5 months now. And we see that the impact on the average reporting, it's the good one, because we don't have huge peaks in opening. We don't have huge downgrades in deliverability. So we took the option to only make sure that we say it's open when there is a click behind it. Now I can go more in depth into that if you want, but I think that gives you at least how we at Actito have basically implemented, and we're still adapting our rules based on Apple Mail privacy.
Yeah, but a solid question, absolutely. Okay, so moving on then, I see there's another question. So remove tracking, is the remove tracking feature also something users can change in subscription forms themselves? Yes, they can. So it is an attribute in your Actito database. If you create an Actito form or you have a preference center, it is something that you can add to your preference center and which can be updated automatically when people fill in those forms.
And just to happy answer your question, that we answer your question, Handy. And this is how we do. Igor, exactly. That is where, again, keep in mind that putting the customer at the center and just providing him the questions, but also your processes will help you build that relation. And at Actito, I would say, ask your people to update data every quarter. Key data is a good way to do. Asking this kind of question, if you feel very close to the fact that you want to offer the option to people to be tracked or not, could be integrated in your, hey, let me know if this data is still accurate so that I can be very good in my personalization with you and trustworthy.
Yep, absolutely. So, and just a quick, that's the geeky side maybe, but if you have your forms, you are still able to display certain pieces of text. If people fill in yes or no to an answer, you still might add a bit of text if people have unsubscribed for a marketing consent, for example, where you can say, look, we can also offer you the option of opting in for marketing consent, but deactivating your tracking. So there's lots of ways to play with that. I think we're still at the very beginning of this, but there are ways to experiment and see how your customers are most happy with the way you approach this. Okay, so moving on, because I see we're moving past the time limit. Imagine that Franklin comes to us and he says, look, I want to have all this data available. This is also a right that he has through the GDPR. Then we can easily provide that data to Franklin in the Actito interface. So if I go back to my profiles, we just look him up. So imagine we have him on the phone. We've looked up Mr. Franklin Benson. And as soon as we have his name popping up, we can verify whether that is actually his profile by asking a couple of questions. And then when we know it's about this person, then I can just click here on more and export. And this is GDPR export, meaning that we export all the data that we have on Franklin Benson to provide it to him. So I'll just click export here. Now, you won't get this data through email. As we said, that's it's not very safe. So something that I strongly advise you to use anytime you're sharing sensitive customer data with a colleague or another Actito user is to use the transfer box. You can find it here under add-ons. And this is a safe environment within Actito to share files. It will first scan the files for malware, and it will sit there until your colleague has recuperated the file to use for targetings or additional personalizations. So as you can see, I can find it here. This is my export that I've made. I can download this. And then I get an overview of the different pieces of information I had on Franklin. So it's being divided also for him to easier keep track of what's there. This is everything we had in the profile table. This is everything regarding purchases. And this is everything regarding loyalty. So this is a very important part. If you ever have a customer requesting that kind of information, know that it's just 2 clicks away to share it with them. And you're, again, compliant with GDPR.
And everything Brian is showing is dummy data, even the fact that he's downloading the files and everything. Don't worry, no breaches over here. It's just so that you can understand and how you can apply it within your own license.
Yeah, and if it were customer data, you delete it directly afterwards, of course. So imagine that Franklin says, okay, all this data, I'm not really following your brand anymore. I'm not buying anything from you anymore. So I'd like to be deleted from your database. Well, that's also quite easy to do. You just click on your profile, you hit delete, and you can provide a reason. Typically, I would advise you there to put on Mr. Franklin has contacted us by phone on this date and requested us to remove his data. Because even if we delete the data, there's still an anonymous trace left behind to make sure that we can prove that this data has been deleted. So if that person comes back to you and claims that you haven't deleted his data, you can come to us and we have those traces. We can provide it to you to actually prove that the data has been deleted. So otherwise, if we delete it and there's no proof, then you're again in a tacky situation. So that's something we took care of as well. Now, a good point that someone else made in the previous release is the fact that you have your license, but anyone might have access to your license in your company and might do with the data what they want. That's not true either. So we've had another great update, which is here, the license configuration. You'll find it under your avatar icon, where you can really start to configure your license security-wise. First of all, for example, we have the tab users, and this is where we can attribute different roles to users. So I can say this person only has access to the transfer box. This person can only send emails. This person cannot do any exports on my database, to make sure that only people with the right authorization can do the right manipulations in Actito. Other things that you can do, because here we're talking about people that use the interface. You have IT people that can use Actito through APIs. Even here, you can put on restrictions saying only these people can use the API credentials from a specific IP address. So security-wise, there's a whole lot more that you can do to make sure that your license is secure. If you have any doubts on that, you can contact your ASM and they'll be happy to help you with that. And another thing that I strongly advise you to do is have a look at this part, authentication, which is about your license access. So this is a demo license, so we have basic access. There's no sensitive data in there. But what we do in our other licenses is we enable two-factor authentication. And you can choose whether you use two-factor authentication by email or SMS. So every time that I'm going to log in, I need to provide my credentials. I receive an email or an SMS with a unique code, and I have to enter that before I can use Actito. Again, making sure that there's no malicious people on your platform doing stuff that you wouldn't like them to do. So have a look at that. It's a nice upgrade as well. So security-wise, again, we really went the extra mile this time for this release to make sure that we have those extra bits of security and making sure that you can still build it properly with your customers. That concludes my tour of the platform. I don't know if there's any questions regarding this.
I didn't saw any questions popping up. I think we try to answer them on the fly. I like the fact that we had to make a little look on the MPP, Mail Privacy by Apple. I will translate what we have done in French so that you can access it and make sure that our friends can have it. The fact that we're putting the customer in the center and that tracking feature that it can be basically ask the question to the consumer is, I think, really us showing the way of being customer centric again. I also drop one of our partners, which is active in all the markets we are, which is Didomi. And Didomi is a consent management platform. They also have an extension to a preference center. I dropped the page there so that you can have a look at them as well. I will make some interviews about them in the future so that we can really slice those. I also redrop the developer portal because I think you're mentioning the API access where we can basically determine the access to which feature, which data. So I think we went quite very broad over here. Would love to hear if there are still questions from the 10 plus people in the chat. Of course, you can always reach out at marketing@actito.com. Benoit, I was very pleased to have him with us, but you see the passion, but also the knowledge behind it and everything he knows about it. So again, feel free to ask us questions, to bring us into conversation that you may be having internally. I can tell you that we did a lot of new customers that are jumping in, and Benoit had a lot of discussion with legal department, but also with technical department about how we do and cope with the data. I think that is not something you will have with a lot of vendors in the market. Again, not doing a sales pitch over here, but definitely telling what we do for more than 800 brands today. We are accessible. That's why we do those releases as well. Sorry for me nearly dying during my part. But Brian is always there. So you see, there is always recovery planning, even in presentations. We never die.
We got the backups right here. Yeah.
We got the backups ready. So yeah, thank you, everybody. Merci beaucoup, Benoit. Thank you, merci, Brian.
Yeah, I can maybe just add one
sorry.
thing because I can imagine people asking the question, okay, if we have to switch from a couple of American solutions as well, we're building out our partnerships with a lot of European solutions as well. I think it might be worth it having a look at the partnership landscape we have today. There's a partner section on our website. They are European solutions, so you might have a look at those to consider the alternatives you have regarding the American solutions.
And I want to say a huge thank you again to Igor and Handy for asking questions. We feel always better when we have questions. So we had questions from the UK and from Belgium this time. So wishing you an amazing Friday afternoon, guys. Take care. Don't fall sick like I am because it's really annoying. And wishing you already a good weekend to all of you. And see maybe some of you in the French session at 3 p.m. Europe time. Thank you very much. See you later.
Great weekend, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.